Michael Grant, a seasoned police captain, a late-night traffic stops quickly spiraled into an experience that exposed the deep fractures between law enforcement and the community it's meant to protect. What began as a routine drive home transformed into a pivotal moment of humiliation, sparking questions not only about fairness, but about the very fabric of trust and accountability. As Michael struggled to process the event, he found an unlikely ally and a bold idea, one that could redefine the meaning of service, justice, and community. But change is never simple. In the face of doubt, resistance, and personal trials, Michael embarks on a journey that challenges him to lead with humility, rebuild broken bridges, and confront the systems he once believed in. Along the way, acts of kindness, courage, and resilience illuminate a path forward, not just for him, but for those who follow. The streets were quiet that night, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Michael Grant adjusted his rearview mirror, his seasoned hands steady on the wheel. He was driving home after a long evening at a charity event, the kind of night that left him both exhausted and fulfilled. In the passenger seat sat Daniel Parker, his closest friend and a fellow advocate for the community. Jazz music played softly on the car stereo, the smooth melodies filling the silence as they reflected on the event's success. "Did you see the kids' faces tonight?" Daniel asked, his voice alive with excitement. "It is moments like these that make the work worth it." Michael smiled, his tired eyes lighting up. "They were happy, Daniel. Really happy. If we can keep building on this momentum, I believe we can make a real difference." Daniel leaned back, his gaze shifting to the window where rows of suburban houses blurred past. "We need to expand," he said. "Bring in larger sponsors and make this more than just a local effort." Michael nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. For him, it was not just about the present moment, but about creating a future where such events were not necessary, where every child had access to the opportunities they deserved. The quiet was interrupted by the blaring of a siren and the flashing of red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. Michael instinctively glanced at Daniel, who looked equally puzzled. "What do they want?" Daniel asked, his voice tinged with unease. Michael sighed and pulled the car to the side of the road. "I do not know," he replied calmly, "but let us follow their instructions. No need to escalate things." The tension in the car thickened as two officers approached, their silhouettes outlined by the pulsing lights of the patrol car. The younger officer, Trevor Burns, tapped on Michael's window with a sharp rap. His demeanor was cold, his eyes scanning Michael and Daniel with suspicion. Michael rolled down the window, his expression neutral but composed. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "License and registration," Burns said curtly, ignoring the question. Michael retrieved his documents without hesitation and handed them over. Burns barely glanced at them before turning his attention to Daniel. "You! I need your ID." Daniel frowned. "I am not driving. Why do you need my ID?" "Do not question me," Burns snapped. "Hand it over." Michael placed a hand on Daniel's arm, giving him a subtle nod. Reluctantly, Daniel complied, fishing his wallet from his pocket and handing over his ID. The younger officer stalked back to the patrol car while his partner, Thomas Reed, lingered near the vehicle, his expression guarded but less severe. Daniel exhaled sharply. "This feels wrong, Michael." Michael kept his gaze on the patrol car, his mind racing. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "We have done nothing wrong." Minutes dragged on like hours as Burns and Reed conferred near the patrol car. When Burns returned, his tone was sharper. "Step out of the car, both of you." Michael frowned, his composure cracking slightly. "Officer, I think we deserve to know why." "You are acting suspiciously," Burns replied. "Step out now." Michael knew the risk of defiance. As a captain in the police force with over 2 decades of experience, he had seen such situations spiral out of control. He gave Daniel a steady look before opening his door. "Let us comply," he said softly. The cold air bit at them as they stepped out of the car. Under the flashing lights, they stood silently while Burns gestured for them to lean against the vehicle. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick and oppressive. Burns began shining his flashlight into the car, inspecting the back seat and trunk without permission. Michael spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Officer, I do not consent to a search." Burns turned to face him, his expression hard. "Are you obstructing an officer in the line of duty? What are you hiding?" Michael met his gaze steadily. "I am hiding nothing, but I also have rights." At that moment, Thomas Reed stepped forward. "Brian," he said quietly, addressing Burns by his first name, "this has gone far enough. Let us run their information and let them go." Burns hesitated, glaring at Michael before retreating to the patrol car. Reed lingered for a moment, his eyes meeting Michael's. There was something unspoken in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, perhaps regret. But before either man could speak, Burns returned. "You are both being detained," he announced, his voice echoing in the stillness. He reached for his handcuffs, starting with Michael. As the cold metal encircled his wrists, Michael finally spoke. "I am Captain Michael Grant," he said evenly, "a senior officer in this department, and this will not go unnoticed." Burns froze, his confidence faltering for the first time. "What?" he muttered, glancing at Reed, who visibly paled. Michael's words hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel, standing nearby with his own wrists bound, added, "Do you see what you are doing? This is not just wrong, it is shameful." Burns avoided their gaze, his hand trembling as he finished the task. The flashing lights illuminated Michael's face, etched with a quiet dignity that refused to be diminished. In the distance, a car slowed, and a woman stepped out. She held her phone high, recording the scene. "What is going on here?" she called out, her voice cutting through the tension. Burns spun around, his irritation spilling over. "Get back in your car," he barked. "This is police business." The woman stood her ground. "It looks more like harassment to me. I have every right to record." Her presence was a crack in the wall of authority Burns had built around himself. Reed stepped forward again, this time with urgency. "Brian, stop," he said firmly. "Take the cuffs off, now." Burns hesitated, his authority slipping away as Reed's words gained weight. Finally, he complied, his movements jerky and reluctant. The cuffs fell away from Michael's wrists, but the sting of their presence lingered. As the two men returned to their car, the woman approached Michael. "I am sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. "If there is anything I can do to help, let me know." Michael looked at her, his resolve hardening. "Thank you," he replied. "I think you just did." Driving home in silence, Michael and Daniel processed the night's events. For Michael, it was a moment of clarity. He had spent years working within the system, believing he could enact change from the inside. Now, he saw how deeply the roots of injustice ran. As they pulled into his driveway, Daniel turned to him. "What now?" Michael took a deep breath, his gaze fixed ahead. "Now," he said, "we fight back, not with anger, but with action." And so, a night that began with humiliation ended with a promise, a quiet vow to turn pain into purpose and to let the ripples of kindness and resilience create waves of change. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds of Michael Grant's modest home, but it did little to ease the heaviness that had settled over him. His hands, still aching from the cold bite of the handcuffs, rested on the kitchen table as he stared into his untouched coffee. The events of the night before replayed in his mind, each detail a reminder of how even his rank and years of service could not shield him from prejudice. Across from him, Daniel Parker leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of frustration and determination. "That woman who recorded everything?" She was brave, he said, breaking the silence. I am telling you, Michael, her video is already everywhere. People are talking about it. This could be the moment to push for real change. Michael exhaled, his eyes drifting toward the window. I know, he said quietly, but it cannot just be about me. It has to be about the bigger picture, about all the people who face this every day without a platform or a voice. Daniel nodded, his conviction unwavering. Then let us make it about them. We start something bigger than us. Something that lasts. The conversation was interrupted by the soft buzz of Michael's phone. He glanced at the screen, a string of notifications from social media, emails and texts from colleagues offering tentative support. One email, however, caught his eye. It was from a woman named Sarah Ellis. The subject line read, "Thank you for your courage." Intrigued, Michael opened the email. Dear Captain Grant, I saw the video of what happened to you and your friend last night. I want to say how sorry I am that you had to go through that. I have faced my own share of injustices over the years, though nothing as public as this. Your calm and composed response were inspiring, and it reminded me of something I learned as a teacher sometimes. The strongest lessons come not from what we say, but from how we act. If there is anything I can do to support you, please let me know. I would be honored to help. Sincerely, Sarah Ellis. Michael read the email twice, struck by the sincerity of her words. He forwarded it to Daniel, who read it quickly and raised his eyebrows. She sounds genuine, he said. You should meet her. Michael hesitated. He was used to standing on his own, even in the face of adversity. Accepting help did not come naturally. But something about Sarah's words felt different, as though they came from someone who truly understood the weight of his struggle. Later that afternoon, Michael reached out to Sarah, and they arranged to meet at a local coffee shop. The coffee shop was a cozy space tucked into the corner of a bustling street. When Michael arrived, he spotted Sarah immediately. She was in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that reminded him of the teachers who had shaped his own childhood. Captain Grant? She asked, standing as he approached. Please call me Michael, he said, shaking her hand. They sat down, and for a moment, neither spoke. Michael took a sip of his coffee, wondering how to start, but Sarah spoke first. I used to teach at a school where most of the kids came from tough backgrounds, she began. They were bright, full of potential, but the system made it hard for them to thrive. I spent years fighting for them, trying to give them opportunities. That is why I wanted to reach out to you. What happened to you last night, it is not just your story. It is the story of so many people. I think you have the chance to do something powerful with it. Michael listened, surprised by the passion in her voice. I appreciate that, he said, but the truth is, I do not know where to start. I have seen this kind of thing happen countless times, but last night, it felt personal. I am still processing it. Sarah nodded. That is understandable, but you have a platform most people do not. You can speak to communities, to your colleagues in the force, and start conversations that could lead to real change. Michael considered her words. What do you suggest? We could organize a community forum, Sarah said. A place where people can share their stories and experiences. It would not just be about what happened to you, it would be about building trust and understanding between the community and the police. Michael hesitated. The idea was bold, and it would draw attention both positive and negative. But deep down, he knew Sarah was right. Change had to start somewhere, and he had spent his entire career believing in the possibility of a better system. All right, he said finally, let us do it, but I will need your help. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with determination. You have got it. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Sarah worked tirelessly to bring the forum to life. Daniel joined their efforts, using his connections to secure a venue and spread the word. They reached out to local leaders, educators, and even fellow officers, hoping to gather a diverse group of voices. As the date approached, Michael found himself grappling with doubt. Would anyone show up? Would the forum make a difference? On the morning of the event, he stood in the empty hall, staring at rows of chairs neatly arranged in front of a small stage. His nerves were palpable, but Sarah's steady presence reassured him. "It is normal to feel this way," she said. "But remember, even if only a handful of people come, it is a start. Every movement begins with a single step." By the time the event began, the hall was nearly full. Teachers, parents, students, business owners, and even a few officers had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and cautious hope. Michael took the stage, his heart pounding. He spoke about his experience, not just as someone who had faced discrimination, but as a man who had dedicated his life to justice and fairness. He talked about the responsibility of law enforcement, to serve and protect all members of the community equally. When he finished, Sarah took the microphone. Her words were softer, but no less powerful, as she shared stories of her students' kids who had faced challenges beyond their control, but had persevered because someone believed in them. As the forum opened to the audience, a young man named Caleb Watson stood. Nervously, he shared a story about how a small act of kindness from a stranger had changed his perception of the police. His voice trembled, but his words carried weight, inspiring others to share their own experiences. By the end of the night, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Strangers exchanged ideas and contacts, officers listened intently to community members, and Michael felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah turned to him. "You see, this is just the beginning." Michael nodded, a quiet determination settling in his chest. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was not walking the path alone. The days following the forum brought an unexpected sense of momentum. Michael Grant woke early the next morning, staring out his kitchen window as the sunlight streamed through the curtains. He felt a faint spark of hope, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The turnout had been better than expected, and the energy in the room lingered in his memory. For the first time since the traffic stop, Michael believed that the community could move forward. Daniel Parker arrived mid-morning, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He set it on the table and grinned. "You made waves last night, Michael," he said. "People are still talking about it. I got 3 calls this morning, 1 from a reporter and 2 from local businesses who want to help." Michael raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Businesses? What did they say?" "One of them, a guy named Henry Coleman, owns a string of restaurants. He's offering to sponsor the next event," Daniel said. "He even mentioned wanting to help with outreach programs for kids. I told him we'd follow up." Michael nodded slowly. "That's encouraging," he said, "but we need to be careful. If we expand too quickly, we could lose focus." Daniel leaned back, his smile fading slightly. "I get that, but we can't let this moment slip away. People are ready to listen, Michael. They just need us to lead." Michael sighed, his thoughts swirling. He had spent his career navigating the complexities of law enforcement, but leading a grassroots movement felt foreign and overwhelming. Yet he couldn't ignore the fire Daniel's words ignited. Later that week, Michael and Sarah Ellis met Henry Coleman at one of his restaurants, a bustling diner on the edge of town. Henry was a middle-aged man with a warm smile and a commanding presence. He welcomed them with firm handshakes and led them to a booth in the corner. "First, let me say thank you for what you're doing," Henry began, his tone earnest. "I grew up in this neighborhood, and I know firsthand how much distrust there is between the community and the police. What you're building here, it matters." Michael appreciated Henry's straightforwardness. "We're trying," he said, "but this is just the beginning. We're figuring things out as we go." "Well, you've got my support," Henry said. "I want to do more than write a check, though. I want to help you reach people. My restaurants serve hundreds of families every week. Let's use that to get the word out." Sarah chimed in. That's a great idea. Maybe we could hold smaller discussions at your locations, invite people to share their experiences in a more casual setting. Henry nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Let's start next month. You bring the ideas, and I'll handle the logistics. As they left the diner, Michael felt a strange mix of gratitude and unease. Henry's offer was generous, but it also raised the stakes. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their own disappointment, they'd risk letting down everyone who had placed their trust in them. Over the next few weeks, the initiative gained momentum. The small group discussions at Henry's diners proved to be a success, drawing in voices from all walks of life. Teachers, parents, students, and officers came together to share stories and seek solutions. Michael was struck by how much he learned from these conversations. One evening, during a session at a diner, a young mother named Vanessa shared how a single act of kindness had saved her from despair. I was 19, Vanessa said, her voice trembling slightly. I had just lost my job, and I didn't know how I was going to take care of my baby. I was sitting on a bench outside a grocery store, crying, when a stranger walked up and handed me a bag of groceries. He didn't say much, just that he hoped it would help. I never saw him again, but that moment changed everything for me. It gave me the strength to keep going. Her story resonated deeply with Michael. He realized that change didn't always come from grand gestures. It often began with small, deliberate acts of kindness. After the session, Vanessa approached Michael. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. I've never talked about that before, but being here tonight made me feel safe enough to share. Michael nodded, humbled by her words. Thank you for trusting us, he replied. Despite the growing support, challenges loomed. Some members of the police force viewed Michael's efforts with suspicion, and a few openly criticized him for what they saw as pandering to the community. One afternoon, Michael was called into a meeting with Deputy Chief Walter Hughes, a stern man with decades of service. Grant, Hughes began, his tone measured. I've been hearing about your community work. I respect the effort, but some of the officers feel like you're painting the department in a bad light. Michael leaned forward, his expression calm but firm. With all due respect, sir, I'm not painting the department in any light. I'm trying to address the issues that are already there. If we ignore them, we lose the trust of the people we're supposed to serve. Hughes studied him for a long moment before nodding. Just be careful, he said. You're walking a fine line. Michael left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. The resistance only strengthened his resolve to push forward. At the next community forum, the room was packed. Michael stood at the front, flanked by Sarah and Daniel. He spoke candidly about the challenges they faced, but also celebrated the progress they had made. I know it's not easy to sit here and talk about these things, he said, his voice steady. But every story we share, every connection we make, brings us one step closer to the community we want to build. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with each of us. The audience erupted into applause, and Michael felt a wave of gratitude. As the event concluded, a familiar face approached him. It was Rachel Foster, a fellow officer who had attended a few of the sessions. Captain, she said, her voice quiet, I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. It's made me think about how I approach my work. Michael smiled, encouraged by her words. Thank you, Rachel. That means a lot. And remember, we're all learning together. As Rachel walked away, Michael glanced at Sarah and Daniel, both of whom were engaged in conversations with attendees. He felt a sense of pride not for himself, but for the collective effort that was beginning to take shape. The night ended with a sense of triumph, but Michael knew the road ahead would be long. Still, he found solace in the knowledge that he was no longer walking it alone. The momentum from the forum carried into the following weeks, and Michael Grant found himself busier than ever. Between planning future events and juggling his responsibilities as a captain in the police force, He often felt stretched thin. Yet, for the first time in years, he also felt purposeful. One evening, Michael sat at his kitchen table, papers spread out before him. Flyers for upcoming workshops, notes from the last forum, and contact lists blurred together as fatigue weighed on him. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he could sustain the growing effort. The sound of his phone vibrating broke his train of thought. Picking it up, he saw a message from Daniel Parker. "Daniel, Henry wants to meet again. Says he has an idea. Tomorrow morning at the diner." Michael replied with a quick acknowledgement and set his phone down. Despite his exhaustion, curiosity sparked within him. The next morning, Michael arrived at Henry Coleman's diner. The breakfast rush was in full swing, with the clinking of plates and cheerful chatter filling the air. Henry greeted him at the door, his handshake firm as ever. "Morning, Michael," Henry said, gesturing toward a quiet booth in the back. Daniel was already seated, a mug of coffee in hand. "You're going to like this," he said with a grin, as Michael slid into the booth. Henry wasted no time getting to the point. "We need to go bigger," he said, his tone brimming with enthusiasm. "The small group discussions are working, but we're only reaching a fraction of the community. I've been thinking about how to expand." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Expand how?" Henry leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I want to fund a mentorship program," he said. "We pair officers with kids from the neighborhood. Give them someone to look up to, someone they can trust." The idea caught Michael off guard. "That's ambitious," he said, "and a lot of work." "True," Henry replied, "but imagine the impact. You've seen the walls come down in the small groups. This could be even more powerful, and I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is." Michael glanced at Daniel, who nodded in agreement. "I think it's worth a shot," Daniel said. "You always talk about building trust. This could be the foundation." Michael sat back, considering the proposal. The logistical challenges were daunting, but the potential was undeniable. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. But we'll need a team to manage it." "Already thought of that," Henry said with a smile. "I'll help you recruit people. Let's start small, 10 kids, 10 officers. We can grow from there." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. Michael, Henry, and Daniel worked tirelessly to identify kids and officers who were willing to participate. Sarah Ellis joined the effort, leveraging her connections in the school system to identify students who could benefit from the program. One of the first kids to sign up was Marcus Taylor, a quiet 12-year-old who had been struggling in school. His mother, Vanessa, the young woman who had shared her story at the diner weeks earlier, was hesitant at first, but ultimately agreed. "I just want him to have a positive influence," Vanessa said when she met with Michael and Sarah. "He's a good kid, but he's had a tough time lately." Michael paired Marcus with Rachel Foster, the officer who had approached him after the forum. Rachel was nervous about the responsibility, but eager to make a difference. The mentorship program launched with a small gathering at one of Henry's restaurants. The kids and officers met for the first time over a casual meal, the atmosphere buzzing with both excitement and apprehension. Michael watched from a distance, his heart swelling as he saw connections beginning to form. Marcus sat across from Rachel, his arms crossed defensively at first, but as Rachel shared stories about her childhood, he began to relax. By the end of the evening, they were laughing together over dessert. The success of the mentorship program spread quickly, attracting attention from local media. Michael was approached by a journalist who wanted to write a feature on the initiative. "Why do you think this program is resonating with people?" the journalist asked during the interview. Michael thought for a moment before responding. "Because it's about human connection," he said. "We're breaking down barriers, one relationship at a time. It's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about planting seeds of trust and understanding." Despite the positive progress, challenges remained. Not everyone in the police department supported the program. Some officers viewed it as unnecessary, while others resented the time and resources it demanded. During a department meeting, Deputy Chief Walter Hughes addressed the issue. "Grant, this mentorship program of yours, it's controversial," he said, his tone pointed. "Some of your colleagues feel like it's taking focus away from core responsibilities." Michael stood, his expression calm but resolute. "With all due respect, sir, this program is part of our core responsibilities. Building trust in the community makes our jobs easier and safer in the long run." The room was silent for a moment before Hughes replied, "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your other duties." Michael nodded, knowing the uphill battle he faced. The mentorship program quickly became the centerpiece of the community outreach effort. Marcus and Rachel's bond grew stronger, with Rachel helping him improve his grades and teaching him life skills. One afternoon, Michael visited a local park where Rachel and Marcus were practicing basketball. He watched as Marcus scored a basket, his grin wide with pride. "Nice shot," Rachel called, clapping her hands. Michael approached them, his hands in his pockets. "How's it going?" he asked. "Good," Rachel said, smiling. "Marcus is a natural." Marcus beamed, his confidence visibly growing. "She's teaching me more than basketball," he said. Michael chuckled. "That's the idea." As he walked away, Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The program was making a difference, one child at a time. Later that evening, Michael received an unexpected phone call from Trevor Burns, the officer who had detained him weeks earlier. "Captain Grant," Trevor began, his voice hesitant. "I've been following what you've been doing. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you. And I'd like to help, if you'll let me." Michael was stunned. He took a moment to collect his thoughts before replying. "Thank you, Officer Burns. If you're serious about helping, we can always use more hands." The conversation marked a turning point not just for Trevor, but for Michael as well. It was a reminder that change, while slow, was possible. As the weeks went on, the mentorship program continued to thrive, and Michael began to see the ripple effects of their efforts. The community was healing, one connection at a time, but Michael knew there was still much work to be done. And for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The mentorship program quickly became the centerpiece of Michael Grant's community outreach efforts. Each new connection between officers and children felt like a small victory, a step toward rebuilding the trust that years of systemic issues had eroded. The stories of progress like Rachel Foster and Marcus Taylor were uplifting, but the moments that touched Michael most often came in quiet, unexpected ways. It was during one of these moments that he met Jamie. The day started with a routine visit to the local elementary school, where Sarah Ellis had arranged for Michael and several officers to speak to students about leadership and community service. Michael walked into the brightly lit gymnasium, the cheerful chatter of children filling the air. Rows of folding chairs had been set up, and curious young faces turned to him as he entered. Sarah greeted him near the podium. "The kids are excited," she said with a smile. "They've been asking 100 questions about what it's like to be a police officer." Michael nodded, feeling a familiar blend of responsibility and pride. He scanned the room, noticing a small girl sitting in the front row. She was about 10 years old, with curly hair tied back in a ponytail and wide, inquisitive eyes. Unlike the other children who whispered and giggled, she sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Michael started his presentation with a brief introduction, sharing stories from his career. He emphasized the importance of kindness, courage, and fairness, weaving in examples of how small acts could make a big difference. When he opened the floor for questions, hands shot up immediately. The children were eager to know everything what it felt like to wear the badge, whether he'd ever caught a bad guy, and even if he had a favorite donut. Amid the laughter, Michael noticed the quiet girl in the front row raise her hand hesitantly. He pointed to her, his tone gentle. "What's your name?" "Jamie," she said softly. "Nice to meet you, Jamie. What's your question?" She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Do you think someone like me could be a police officer one day? The question caught Michael off guard. There was a vulnerability in her voice that struck him, as though she wasn't asking about a dream, but seeking permission to have one. He crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "Why do you ask that, Jamie?" She fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "Because some people say I'm too quiet, and I don't always fit in." Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. He saw himself in Jamie, the same uncertainty, the same questions about whether he belonged. He smiled warmly. "Jamie, being quiet isn't a bad thing. Some of the best officers I know are great listeners, and that's just as important as being loud or bold. And as for fitting in, the world needs people who think differently. If being a police officer is your dream, don't let anyone tell you it's not possible." Her face lit up, and Michael felt a pang of emotion he couldn't quite explain. After the presentation, as the students filtered out of the gym, Jamie lingered behind. Sarah noticed and walked over to her. "Jamie, did you want to talk to Captain Grant?" Jamie nodded shyly, clutching a small notebook. Sarah gestured for Michael to join them, and he approached with a kind smile. Jamie handed him the notebook. I wrote a story about what I think being a police officer is like," she said. "I was wondering if you could read it." Michael took the notebook gently. "I'd be honored, Jamie. Thank you for sharing this with me." As Jamie left with her classmates, Sarah turned to Michael, her eyes glistening. "She's going to remember this moment for the rest of her life," she said. Michael nodded, the notebook feeling heavier in his hands than it should. "So will I," he replied. That evening, Michael sat at his kitchen table, the notebook open in front of him. Jamie's story was written in neat, careful handwriting, with simple illustrations on each page. It was about a girl who dreamed of becoming a police officer. The story was filled with moments of bravery and kindness, helping a lost child find their way home, standing up for someone who had been wronged, and reminding people that they weren't alone. It was idealistic but profoundly moving. As Michael read, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jamie's story was a reminder of why he had joined the force in the first place. It wasn't about authority or power. It was about making a difference, however small. The next week, Michael invited Jamie and her mother to visit the precinct. Jamie's eyes widened as she stepped through the doors, taking in the bustling activity. Michael introduced her to his colleagues, including Rachel Foster, who greeted her with a warm smile. "You're Jamie, right?" Rachel said. "Captain Grant's been telling us about you." Jamie's face lit up with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "He has?" Rachel nodded. "He said you're going to be an amazing officer one day." Michael watched as Jamie's confidence grew with each interaction. By the time they left, she was chattering excitedly with her mother, clutching a badge-shaped sticker Michael had given her. "That girl has something special," Rachel said as they watched her go. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She reminded me of why I'm doing all this," he said. In the weeks that followed, Jamie became a regular visitor at the precinct, often joining group activities with the mentorship program. She bonded with Marcus Taylor and the other kids, her quiet confidence gradually blossoming. One afternoon, as the mentorship group worked on a community project cleaning up a local park, Jamie approached Michael. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for believing in me." Michael crouched to her level, his smile gentle. "Jamie, you've got so much potential. All you need is to believe in yourself, too." Her eyes shone with determination. "I will," she said firmly. That evening, Michael reflected on how much Jamie had impacted him. In her quiet way, she had reminded him of the power of believing in others and how transformative a single moment of encouragement could be. He shared his thoughts with Daniel over the phone. "That's what this is all about," Daniel said. "It's not just about fixing systems. It's about inspiring people. Jamie's one kid, but she's going to inspire others too." Michael nodded, even though Daniel couldn't see him. "You're right, And I'm starting to think the kids are teaching me as much as I'm teaching them. As Michael hung up, he felt a sense of peace. The challenges ahead still loomed, but he knew he wasn't alone. The ripple effects of kindness, whether in a notebook, a smile, or a conversation, were beginning to take hold. The warmth of the day clung to the air as Michael Grant walked into his precinct. The sun filtered through the tall windows, casting soft beams on the polished floors. It was a rare moment of quiet in the usually bustling station, but Michael's thoughts were anything but still. The mentorship program had begun to thrive, and Jamie's growing confidence was a constant source of encouragement. Yet, there were moments when doubt crept in whispers in the precinct about whether his outreach work was distracting from real police work. Though most officers were supportive, a few saw his efforts as naive, even indulgent. Michael had long grown accustomed to resistance, but it was Trevor Burns who occupied his thoughts most often. The young officer's actions during that night still lingered like a thorn. Michael had worked hard to move past the humiliation, but he couldn't forget the sharp edge of Trevor's words or the weight of the handcuffs around his wrists. As Michael settled into his office, a knock at the door drew his attention. To his surprise, it was Trevor. The younger officer stood awkwardly in the doorway, his shoulders tense and his expression uncertain. "Captain Grant," Trevor began, his voice tight. "Do you have a minute?" Michael gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Come in," he said evenly. Trevor hesitated before stepping inside and sitting down. He avoided Michael's gaze, his hands fidgeting in his lap. For a moment, neither man spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Trevor said finally, his voice quiet. "That night, and I owe you an apology." Michael's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he remained silent, letting Trevor continue. "I didn't handle the situation right," Trevor admitted, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't listen. I didn't stop to think. I just assumed. And it was wrong." The room was thick with unspoken tension as Trevor's words hung in the air. Michael studied the young officer carefully, searching for sincerity in his tone and posture. "Why now?" Michael asked, his voice steady but probing. Trevor looked up, his face flushed. "Because I've been watching what you've been doing with the community," he said. "And it's made me realize how blind I've been. I see the connections you're building, and I want to be better." Michael leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Part of him wanted to accept the apology without question, to let this moment be a step toward closure. But another part of him, the part still carrying the weight of that night, needed more. "You know, Officer Burns," Michael said, his tone measured, "an apology is a good start, but words aren't enough. What matters is what you do next." Trevor nodded, his gaze steady now. "I understand that, and I want to do more. If there's a way I can help with the mentorship program or anything else, I'm willing to put in the work." Michael was quiet for a long moment, weighing Trevor's words. Finally, he nodded. "All right, if you're serious, I'll give you a chance. But this isn't about making amends for one mistake. It's about committing to change for yourself and the people we serve." "I understand," Trevor said, his voice firm. "Thank you, Captain." The next week, Trevor joined the mentorship program. Michael paired him with a boy named Elijah, a spirited 11-year-old with a passion for drawing. At first, Elijah was wary of Trevor, his natural energy dampened by suspicion. But Trevor approached the mentorship with humility, listening more than he spoke, and taking the time to understand Elijah's interests. One afternoon, as they sat in the precinct's community room, Elijah showed Trevor a sketch he had been working on, a detailed drawing of a superhero in a police uniform. "Is that supposed to be me?" Trevor asked with a grin. Elijah shrugged, a small smile creeping onto his face. "Maybe. You're not bad for a cop." Trevor laughed, the sound genuine. "I'll take that as a compliment." Michael watched from a distance, a sense of cautious hope settling over him. Trevor's actions were beginning to match his words. And Elijah's growing trust was proof that change, while slow, was possible. The progress Trevor made wasn't lost on his fellow officers, many of whom began to see him in a new light. Rachel Foster, who had been one of Michael's earliest supporters, approached him one evening. "I've been watching Burns with Elijah," Rachel said. "He's really putting in the effort. I didn't think he had it in him." Michael nodded. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But people can surprise you." Rachel hesitated before adding, "You know, this program, it's changing more than just the kids. It's changing us, too." One evening, after a long day, Michael sat on his porch, the fading light of dusk painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Daniel joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Burns is surprising you, isn't he?" Daniel said as he handed Michael a mug. Michael chuckled softly. "He is. I didn't think he'd come around, but he's proving me wrong." Daniel leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Giving people the chance to be better even when they've messed up." Michael nodded, his gaze distant. "I guess so. But it's not easy. Forgiveness is one thing. Trust is another." "True," Daniel said. "But you're showing him and everyone else what leadership looks like. And that's worth something." Michael sipped his coffee, the warmth spreading through him. "I hope so," he said quietly. As weeks turned into months, Trevor continued to grow into his role as a mentor. His relationship with Elijah flourished, and his efforts began to inspire other officers to take part in the program. One afternoon, as Michael walked through the precinct, he overheard Trevor talking to a group of new recruits. "It's not about the badge," Trevor was saying. "It's about the people. If you're not here to serve, you're in the wrong line of work." Michael paused, a faint smile touching his lips. He knew there was still a long way to go for Trevor, for the department, and for the community. But moments like these reminded him why he had started this journey. That evening, Michael received a text from Jamie's mother. "Jamie's mom. Jamie wanted me to tell you she got an A on her civics project about being a police officer. She says it's all because of you." Michael stared at the message, his chest tightening with emotion. He thought of Jamie, of Elijah, of every child who had found hope through the program. They were the reason he kept going, even on the hardest days. He replied simply, "Thank you. Tell Jamie I'm proud of her." As he set his phone down, Michael felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Change was slow, often frustrating, but it was happening one person, one moment at a time. The precinct buzzed with activity as Michael Grant made his way to the community room, where a group of officers and mentors had gathered for their monthly check-in. The mentorship program had grown steadily, and the changes were beginning to show not just in the kids, but in the officers who participated. Trevor Burns was already there, chatting with Elijah, whose animated gestures suggested he was recounting a story. Across the room, Rachel Foster stood with Marcus Taylor, helping him refine a presentation for school. Michael paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. The once divided lines between the community and the police were beginning to blur. There was still work to do, but moments like this reminded him why he had taken on the challenge. After the meeting, Michael stayed behind with a few officers to review progress reports. Rachel spoke up, her tone thoughtful. "Burns has really come into his own," she said. "He's not just mentoring Elijah, he's stepping up as a leader." Michael nodded. "He's shown a lot of growth," he replied. "It's proof that people can change when they're given the chance." Rachel hesitated before continuing. "The thing is, his attitude is starting to rub off on others. I've noticed a shift in how some of the newer officers approach the job. It's like they're starting to see what it means to really serve." Michael leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. This was exactly what he had hoped for when the program began. A ripple effect of trust and understanding that extended beyond the kids to the force itself. The next day, Michael joined Sarah Ellis at one of the program's workshops, held at a local recreation center. The workshop was designed to foster communication between officers and community members through role-playing exercises and group discussions. One of the exercises involved pairing officers with community members to act out common scenarios, traffic stops, neighborhood disputes, and school interventions. The goal was to help each side see the world through the other's eyes. Michael watched as Trevor and Elijah took the stage for a role play. Trevor played the part of a community member, while Elijah played an officer. The scene began with a pretend traffic stop, and Elijah's delivery was both commanding and empathetic. "Sir, I pulled you over because your tail light is out," Elijah said, his voice steady. "But I'd like to know if there's anything else I should be aware of before we proceed." Trevor leaned into his role, pretending to fumble with his wallet. "I'm just trying to get home," he said, his tone nervous. "I don't want any trouble." Elijah paused, then said, "I understand. Let's work together to get this sorted out." The room erupted into applause as the scene ended, and Michael couldn't help but smile. Elijah had not only absorbed the lessons of the program, but was applying them in a way that showed real growth. As the workshop wrapped up, Michael was approached by a man he didn't recognize. The man introduced himself as Derek Morgan, a local business owner who had recently moved to the area. "I just wanted to say how impressed I am with what you're doing here," Derek said. "It's rare to see this kind of effort to bridge the gap between the community and the police." Michael thanked him, but Derek wasn't finished. "If there's any way I can help, let me know. I've got some resources I can contribute: meeting spaces, funding, whatever you need." Michael shook Derek's hand. "We could always use more allies," he said. "Let's talk more about how you can get involved." The partnership with Derek led to the expansion of the program's reach. With additional funding, they were able to host more workshops, provide transportation for kids to mentorship events, and even start a scholarship fund for participants. Meanwhile, word of the program's success began to spread beyond the local community. Other precincts reached out, asking for advice on starting similar initiatives. Michael found himself fielding calls from departments across the state, each one eager to replicate what he had built. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Some officers remained skeptical of the program, and there were still moments of tension between the force and the community. One such moment occurred during a community meeting, where a heated debate broke out over a recent incident involving an officer's use of force. Michael stepped forward, addressing the crowd with a steady voice. "I know trust doesn't come easily," he said, "but that's why we're here: to listen, to learn, and to improve. No system is perfect, but we're committed to making it better." His words resonated with some, but not all. As the meeting ended, a middle-aged man approached Michael. "I hear what you're saying," the man said, his tone skeptical. "But words are just words. How do we know things will actually change?" Michael met the man's gaze. "Because we're not just talking, we're acting," he said. "And I promise you, we won't stop until every member of this community feels seen and valued." The man studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll hold you to that." One evening, as Michael prepared to leave the precinct, he received a call from Jamie's mother. "Captain Grant, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Jamie's teacher told me she's been speaking up more in class and even helping her classmates when they're struggling. I think it's because of what she's learned from you." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. "Jamie's got so much potential, I'm just glad I could help her see it." After hanging up, Michael sat in his office for a long time, reflecting on how far they had come. The journey wasn't over, but the small victories along the way gave him hope. The next day, Michael gathered his team officers, mentors, and community leaders for a strategy meeting. As they discussed plans for the next phase of the program, Sarah spoke up. "This is bigger than us now," she said. "What we've built here is a model for how communities and police can work together. It's not perfect, But it's a start. Michael looked around the room, his heart swelling with pride. The faces before him represented more than just individuals, they represented a movement, a collective effort to create a better future. As the meeting ended, Trevor approached Michael. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for giving me a second chance. It's changed the way I see everything." Michael placed a hand on Trevor's shoulder. "You earned it," he said, "and now you've got the chance to do the same for someone else." Trevor nodded, his expression resolute. "I won't waste it." That evening, Michael stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he felt like they were heading in the right direction together. The quiet hum of the precinct gave way to the chatter of reporters and clicking cameras as Michael Grant prepared to step up to the podium. Over the past few months, the mentorship program had gained attention far beyond their small community. Local success stories, like Rachel Foster and Marcus Taylor's partnership or Trevor Burns' transformation, had inspired broader conversations about how law enforcement could foster trust and understanding. Now, standing in front of the media, Michael felt both pride and the weight of expectation. "This program began as a small effort to rebuild trust," Michael said, his voice steady but measured. "It was never about fixing everything overnight. It's about showing that change is possible, one relationship, one moment at a time." The reporters fired questions at him as soon as he finished. "How do you respond to critics who say this program is too idealistic?" one asked. Michael smiled faintly, his hands gripping the sides of the podium. "Idealism isn't a bad thing," he replied. "It's what pushes us to dream of a better future. But make no mistake, this program isn't just a dream. It's real, and it's working. We're seeing it in the lives of kids like Marcus and Jamie, in the way officers like Trevor Burns are connecting with the community. Change is slow, but it's happening." The national spotlight brought both opportunities and challenges. Invitations flooded in from cities across the country, asking Michael and his team to speak about the program. Derek Morgan, the business owner who had become a key supporter, offered to cover travel expenses, and Sarah Ellis worked tirelessly to coordinate their growing schedule. One of their first stops was a conference on community policing in Chicago. The event brought together law enforcement leaders, educators, and activists from around the nation. Michael was joined by Daniel Parker, Sarah, Rachel, and Trevor. Each of them spoke, sharing their unique perspectives on the program and its impact. Trevor's speech was particularly moving. Standing before the crowd, he spoke candidly about his mistakes and the lessons he had learned. "I used to see my badge as a symbol of authority," Trevor said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "Now I see it as a responsibility. This program taught me that the people we serve aren't just faces in a crowd. They're individuals with stories, fears, and hopes. It's our job to meet them with respect." The audience erupted in applause, and Michael felt a swell of pride. Trevor's transformation wasn't just personal, it was proof that the program could inspire systemic change. Back home, the program continued to flourish. The partnership with Derek allowed them to expand their resources, offering scholarships for kids in the mentorship program and funding for officer training on implicit bias and community engagement. Jamie, the quiet girl who had once doubted her ability to become a police officer, emerged as a symbol of the program's success. Her teacher shared stories of her newfound confidence, and Jamie herself began speaking at school assemblies about her dreams and the importance of believing in oneself. At one of these assemblies, Michael watched from the back of the room as Jamie stood on stage, her voice clear and strong. "I used to think I wasn't good enough to be a police officer," she said. "But Captain Grant and this program taught me that being different is okay. It's what makes us strong." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Michael couldn't help but smile. Jamie was proof that the seeds of change they had planted were beginning to grow. As the program's influence expanded, so did the challenges. Not everyone was supportive of their efforts. Some critics argued that the focus on community engagement distracted from traditional policing, while others accused the program of being performative rather than impactful. Michael took these criticisms seriously, often addressing them in public forums and interviews. "We're not trying to replace traditional policing," he explained during a town hall meeting. "We're trying to enhance it. Building trust with the community doesn't just make our jobs easier, it makes everyone safer." Despite his reassurances, tensions occasionally flared. During one particularly heated meeting, a retired officer stood up and spoke harshly. "I spent 30 years on the force," the man said. "Back then, we didn't need these touchy-feely programs. We just did our jobs." Michael listened patiently before responding. "I respect your service," he said, "but the world has changed, and so have the challenges we face. Programs like this aren't about being soft, they're about being smart about solving problems before they escalate." The room fell silent, and the retired officer sat down, his expression thoughtful. One evening, Michael received a call from Derek. "I just got off the phone with a friend of mine," Derek said. "He's on the board of a national foundation that funds community initiatives. They're interested in supporting the program on a larger scale." Michael's heart skipped a beat. A partnership with a national foundation could take their efforts to new heights, but it also meant more scrutiny and higher stakes. "That's incredible," Michael said, "but we need to make sure we're ready for something that big." "Agreed," Derek replied. "Let's meet next week and map out a plan." As Michael prepared for the meeting with Derek, he reflected on how far they had come. The program had started as a small, fragile idea, a response to a moment of humiliation and pain. Now it was a movement, fueled by countless acts of kindness and resilience. But Michael knew the journey was far from over. Each new opportunity brought new challenges, and the work of building trust and equity was never truly done. Still, as he walked into the meeting room, flanked by Sarah, Daniel, Rachel, and Trevor, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they had turned a moment of injustice into a beacon of hope, and together, they would continue to fight for a future where every person, regardless of their background, felt seen, valued, and safe. Michael Grant sat in a sleek conference room in the heart of downtown. Across the table were representatives from the National Foundation. Derek Morgan had mentioned a group of influential philanthropists with a history of funding transformative community programs. The walls were lined with abstract art, and the faint hum of air conditioning filled the silence as Michael prepared to present the mentorship program's next phase. At his side sat Derek, Sarah Ellis, and Daniel Parker, each of them key pillars of the initiative. Derek leaned in, whispering, "You've got this." Michael nodded, his hands resting on a folder filled with reports and success stories. As the meeting began, he spoke with the quiet confidence he had honed over years of leadership. "This program started as a simple idea," Michael began. "We paired officers with kids from underserved neighborhoods to build trust and understanding. What we've seen since then is extraordinary. Not only are the kids thriving, but the officers involved are learning how to serve their communities in deeper, more meaningful ways." He shared stories of Jamie's transformation, Trevor Burns' redemption, and the countless small but profound moments that had defined their journey. Sarah and Derek added their insights, emphasizing the program's impact on the community and its potential for national replication. By the time they finished, the room was silent. The foundation's chair, a woman named Evelyn Hart, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "What you've built is remarkable," Evelyn said, "but scaling it nationwide will be a significant challenge. Are you prepared for the obstacles that come with this level of expansion?" Michael met her gaze. "Change is never easy," he said, "but what we've accomplished proves that it's possible. With the right support, we can make this work and change countless lives in the process." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Let's make it happen." The Foundation's support marked a turning point for the program. With additional funding and resources, they launched pilot initiatives in 5 cities, each tailored to the unique needs of its community. Michael traveled extensively, meeting with local leaders, training new mentors, and sharing the lessons he had learned. The work was rewarding, but it also took a toll. Long days on the road and endless meetings left him drained, and he often found himself longing for the quiet simplicity of his early days on the force. One evening, as Michael returned home after a week of travel, he was greeted by a small package on his doorstep. Inside was a handmade card from Jamie. The card featured a drawing of Michael standing alongside Jamie and other kids from the mentorship program. Beneath it, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "Dear Captain Grant, thank you for believing in me. You've helped me see that I can do anything. I hope I can make you proud one day. Love, Jamie." Michael sat on his couch, the card resting in his lap. Tears welled in his eyes as he thought about how far Jamie had come and how her journey mirrored his own in so many ways. Despite the program's success, not everyone was supportive of its expansion. Critics questioned its scalability, while some officers viewed it as a distraction from traditional policing. These voices grew louder as the program gained more attention, creating tension within the department. One morning, Michael was called into a meeting with Deputy Chief Walter Hughes. "Grant," Hughes began, his tone clipped, "I've been hearing mixed feedback about your national work. Some officers feel like you're abandoning the department for a vanity project." Michael bristled, but kept his voice calm. "With all due respect, sir, this is about more than me. It's about creating a model that can improve relationships between law enforcement and the communities we serve." Hughes sighed, his expression softening. "I don't doubt your intentions, Michael. I just need to make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin." "I appreciate your concern," Michael replied, "but I've got a strong team behind me. We're making this work." Back at the precinct, Michael found solace in his team. Rachel Foster continued to be a steadfast ally, taking on more leadership within the local program. Trevor Burns had become a mentor to younger officers, sharing his journey as a cautionary tale and a message of hope. One afternoon, Rachel approached Michael with a proposal. "I think it's time we start bringing the kids into the conversations about policy," she said. "They're the ones most affected by what we do. They should have a voice." Michael considered her words. "That's a bold idea," he said. "But you're right. Let's make it happen." They organized a youth-led town hall, where kids like Jamie and Marcus Taylor shared their perspectives with officers, city officials, and community leaders. The event was raw and emotional, with moments of both pain and hope. Jamie, now a confident speaker, stood before the crowd and said, "We all want the same thing, a safe place to live, and people we can trust. Programs like this show that it's possible to work together and make things better for everyone." Her words drew a standing ovation, and Michael felt a swell of pride. As the program continued to grow, Michael found himself reflecting more often on his journey. Late one night, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, he began jotting down thoughts about the lessons he had learned. What started as a few notes soon grew into a manuscript. Michael poured his heart into the project, documenting not only the program's successes, but also the challenges, failures, and moments of doubt. He titled the book, "The Flame of Hope," a tribute to the resilience and determination that had carried him through. When he shared the draft with Sarah and Daniel, they were moved. "This isn't just a book," Daniel said. "It's a blueprint for change." The book's release coincided with the program's 2-year anniversary, and it became a rallying cry for communities across the nation. Michael's story inspired others to act, sparking new initiatives and partnerships. On the anniversary of the first forum, Michael stood before a packed auditorium, reflecting on how far they had come. "We started with a simple idea," he said, "to rebuild trust through connection. What we've learned along the way is that change isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small, steady steps we take every day. Together, We've proven that hope is stronger than fear, and that kindness has the power to transform lives." The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew they were moving in the right direction. A cool breeze whispered through the city streets as Michael Grant walked into the community center where it had all begun. It was the 3rd anniversary of the mentorship program, and the hall was alive with laughter, conversation, and the energy of a diverse crowd. Kids ran between tables, their smiles radiant. Officers chatted with parents, their uniforms no longer a symbol of authority, but of partnership. Michael stood near the entrance, taking it all in. He had worn many hats in his career: patrol officer, detective, captain, but tonight he felt like just another member of the community. Daniel Parker appeared beside him, a plate of food in hand. "You're doing that thing again," Daniel said with a grin. "What thing?" Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. "The thing where you stand back and act like you're not the reason all of this exists," Daniel replied. Michael chuckled softly. "I'm not the reason. We all are. You, Sarah, Rachel, Trevor, even Jamie. This isn't about me." "Maybe not," Daniel said, "but it wouldn't have started without you." Michael let the words sink in as his eyes drifted to the stage where Jamie, now a confident teenager, stood with a microphone. Jamie had become the unofficial face of the program, her story inspiring countless others. Tonight, she spoke with the poise of someone twice her age, sharing her journey from a shy, uncertain child to a young leader with dreams of becoming a police officer. "When I first met Captain Grant," Jamie said, her voice clear and strong, "I wasn't sure if someone like me could ever belong in his world. But he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And because of him, and because of this program, I believe I can do anything." The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt his chest tighten with pride. Jamie's transformation was a testament to the power of belief and support, and a reminder of why he had chosen to walk this path. As the evening unfolded, Michael moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging kind words with attendees. He stopped to speak with Marcus Taylor, who was now preparing to graduate high school. "I heard you got into that art program you wanted," Michael said, his tone warm. Marcus grinned. "Yeah, I did. Thanks to Officer Foster writing me that recommendation letter." "She told me you earned it on your own," Michael replied. Marcus shrugged, but his smile widened. "Still, it helps knowing people believe in me." Michael placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You've earned every bit of it. I can't wait to see what you create." Later that night, Michael found himself sitting alone on the steps outside the community center. The laughter and music from inside spilled into the quiet night, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a handwritten letter from Trevor Burns. "Dear Captain Grant, I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to make things right. You didn't have to, but you did, and it's changed my life. Working with Elijah and the program has taught me more than I ever learned in training. It's taught me about listening, about humility, and about what it really means to serve. I hope I've made you proud." Trevor Michael smiled faintly, tucking the letter back into his pocket. Trevor's journey had been one of the most unexpected parts of the program's success, and it reminded Michael that change could come from even the most unlikely places. As the evening wound down, Sarah Ellis joined Michael on the steps. "Big night," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. Michael nodded. "Bigger than I ever imagined." Sarah looked out at the quiet street, her expression contemplative. "You've built something that'll last, Michael. Something that'll outlive all of us." Michael took a sip of his coffee, letting her words settle. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was everyone who believed in the idea, who believed in each other." Sarah smiled. "That's what makes it special." Over the next year, the program continued to thrive. The national expansion brought challenges, but also opportunities to reach more communities. The lessons learned in Michael's small city became the foundation for a movement that inspired police departments and neighborhoods across the country. Michael's book, The Flame of Hope, became a bestseller, sparking conversations about trust, equity, and the power of human connection. It was used as a training resource for law enforcement and community organizations, and Michael often received letters from readers who shared how the book had inspired them to act in their own communities. On a crisp autumn morning, Michael attended Jamie's high school graduation. She had been chosen as the class speaker, and her words were as powerful as ever. "Dreams are fragile," Jamie said, her voice steady, "but with the right people beside you, they can grow into something stronger than you ever imagined. I've learned that from this community, from Captain Grant, and everyone who's believed in me. Now, it's my turn to believe in others." As she finished her speech, the crowd erupted into cheers. Michael stood among them, clapping until his hands ached, his heart full. Years later, as Michael prepared to retire from the force, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The night of the traffic stop that had once filled him with pain and anger now seemed like a distant memory, a spark that had ignited something far greater than himself. On his last day at the precinct, Michael found a small box on his desk. Inside was a badge-shaped plaque engraved with the words, "To Captain Michael Grant, for showing us that trust is built, one act of kindness at a time." Michael smiled, his eyes misting as he traced the letters with his fingertips. That evening, Michael stood on his porch, watching the sunset over the neighborhood. He thought of Jamie, Marcus, Trevor, and all the others whose lives had intersected with his. He thought of the community they had built together, a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and hope. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was no longer his to walk alone. He had passed the torch to the next generation, and he knew they would carry it with pride. And as the night settled in, Michael whispered to himself, "We did it." Michael Grant's journey reminds us all that change begins with small, deliberate steps and the courage to believe in something better. His story is a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and hope, proof that one person's determination can ripple out and transform entire communities. Have you ever witnessed or been part of a story where kindness changed someone's life? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Michael's journey inspired you, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Let's spread the message of hope and create a world where trust and understanding lead the way. And before you go, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, we can build a brighter future, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.